Before we dive in, this is part 2 of the story. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, I highly recommend checking it out first. Things will make a lot more sense that way. You can find the link to part 1 in the top right corner now. Alright, let's continue. More of them? Kev whispered, his voice a thin thread in the silence. Should we back up? We could go around? Tommy asked, gripping the edge of his seat. Greg shook his head, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. If we do, we'll never make it to the gym. We're running out of time. For a moment, no one moved, the enormity of what Greg was suggesting hanging heavy in the air. But one by one, we all nodded, determination replacing fear. We were all in this together. All right, Greg said, his voice low and steely. Hold on. As the car plowed forward, the first creature hit the bumper with a bone-rattling thud. But instead of rolling off like we had hoped, it launched itself up onto the hood, then clawed its way onto the roof in a disturbingly quick motion. My heart thundered as I saw its shadow sprawled across the windshield, its limbs twisted, claws scraping against the metal above us. "Oh God, it's on the roof!" Kev shouted, pressing himself back into his seat, his eyes wide with terror. Greg gritted his teeth, hands clamped onto the steering wheel as he tried to keep the car steady. "Hold on! Just hold on!" The creature's claws began tearing into the roof, each strike creating a screeching sound and sending bits of metal raining down on us. Jagged holes appeared one by one, and we could see the claws slashing through, inches away from our heads. "Drive faster, man," Tommy yelled, clutching the edge of his seat as the car lurched forward. "I'm trying," Greg shouted back, his knuckles white as he swerved down the street, doing everything he could to shake the creature off. But no matter how hard he turned or how quickly he sped, the thing clung on, slamming its claws through the roof, reaching deeper each time. In a final, desperate attempt, Greg whipped the steering wheel to the right, then sharply back to the left. The creature was thrown off balance for a split second, enough for its grip to loosen as the car skidded violently toward the school's parking lot. With a sickening crash, we smashed into the curb and spun sideways. The creature flew off the roof, disappearing into the darkness behind us as the car finally lurched to a stop, tilted halfway up on the curb. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, none of us moved. Then, slowly, we took stock of ourselves. I reached up and touched my head, relieved to find no blood. My shoulder ached from the impact, and I could feel a bruise forming along my side, but I was otherwise okay. Around me, the others were doing the same. Tommy rubbing his elbow, Kev clutching his shoulder, Greg with a split lip from where he'd bitten down too hard. "Everyone, good?" I asked. "Define good," Kev muttered, wincing as he flexed his arm. But when he looked up at the others, a nervous grin cracked his face. "Yeah, I'm good." Greg took a deep breath, nodding. "Same here." He looked at the car, grimacing at the ruined roof and crushed fender. "But my mom's gonna kill me." I let out a shaky laugh. Let's focus on not getting killed first. We climbed out of the car, feeling the aches and pains from the crash, but grateful to be in one piece. The school gym loomed ahead, just beyond the edge of the lot. Despite everything, we've made it. We had gotten this far. Now, we just had to get my sister and her friends and find a way to get out of here. You guys realize something? I mean, the first one we saw, at the house, she looked almost normal, human even, said Tommy. I looked over at him, my mind flashing back to the girl we'd found. Yeah, she was freaked out, but she still looked like a person. Kinda. Greg nodded, looking off into the distance. It's not just their appearance, it's like they've evolved. They've got these huge, bulky bodies now, but they're also fast. Their claws are longer, sharper. It's like they're not thinking. They're just hunting. Kev looked down, his face grim. If that's true, then we're screwed. They're not just some mindless monsters anymore. They're evolving into something way worse, something smarter. Then we can't waste any more time. We need to stay ahead of them. If we don't, we're going to be dealing with creatures that are too strong, too fast, too smart to handle, I replied. We all fell silent for a moment, feeling the weight of what we were up against. Whatever these creatures were, whatever they had once been, they were changing. Soon, we wouldn't just be fighting some monsters, we'd be fighting a force that was learning to hunt us. Greg popped open the trunk, and we peered inside, hoping to find anything we could use to defend ourselves. Greg dug around and pulled out an old wooden baseball bat. He weighed it in his hands, giving it a test swing. I've got this. Should be good enough to get us through if anything jumps us again. Tommy pulled out a screwdriver, tucking it into his back pocket as a backup. Still got my knife, he said, holding up his old pocket knife, the blade dulled but reliable. But this might come in handy too. Kev grabbed a tire iron. This'll work, he murmured, mostly to himself, but we all nodded in silent agreement. I fumbled around before finding a heavy wrench, its weight solid in my hand. I forced a small grin, trying to shake off my nerves. All right, looks like we're all armed and ready for whatever this is. We set off toward the school, moving in tense silence, weapons gripped tightly. Every shadow seemed to breathe, every gust of wind carrying the possibility of danger. The parking lot was vast and quiet. As we entered the empty, dimly lit halls of our high school, we felt a strange sense of nostalgia mixed with dread. Every corner, every stretch of linoleum, every creak in the floor was so familiar, yet tonight, the building felt like a different place entirely. We moved carefully, keeping an eye out for any shadows that might be lurking, but with each step forward, the tension eased just a little. It was almost comforting to be back in these hallways, and as we passed the rows of lockers and posters advertising long-past events, a bit of our old banter returned. So, Tommy, Kev started, nudging him with a grin, you're still dead set on ditching us for the mountains next year, huh? Tommy rolled his eyes, smiling despite everything. Yeah, man. Somebody's got to live off the grid and teach y'all how to survive someday. I'll be up there, raising chickens and growing vegetables, while you guys are still stuck in the rat race. Oh, please, Kev shot back, laughing quietly. I give you 2 months before you're back, begging for League of Legends and burgers. Greg snorted. Yeah, you'll miss us too much. Besides, you're not going to make it out there if you think a pocket knife's the only survival tool you need. Tommy shrugged, flashing his trusty knife with a grin. Laugh all you want, city boys. I'm going to be living in peace while you all are drowning in student loans and bad jobs. The laughter was quiet but felt good, normal, like the kind we had on 100 nights when life wasn't so frightening. But then Greg glanced over at me. His expression shifting as a question seemed to form on his face. So, Casey, Greg started hesitantly, after all this, do you think you'll, try to get back with Ashley? I frowned for a second and Greg noticed. Ah, shit, Greg muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Sorry, Casey, I shouldn't have asked that. I guess it's just, I don't know, this place feels like we're just back in school. I forgot for a second. Well, you know. I shook my head, forcing a small smile to ease the awkwardness. It's okay, man, really. I was thinking about her too. I hope she's okay, wherever she is. The silence lingered, heavy with unspoken worries and memories, until Tommy broke it with a clap on my shoulder. She's fine, man. Probably better than we are right now. We'll find her and everyone else when we get through this. I nodded, grateful for Tommy's optimism. I took a deep breath, trying to focus on the reason we had come here. My sister. "Let's keep moving," I said. We continued down the hall, the weight of the conversation hanging over us, but somehow it was easier to move forward knowing we were in it together. Whatever happened tonight, we'd make sure each of us got through it, even if our plans for the future felt a bit more distant than before. Finally, we reached the double doors to the gym, its faint glow spilling into the hallway. With a final glance at one another, we pushed the doors open. The gym was still and quiet, its usual hum of activity replaced by a thick, tense silence. As we pushed through the double doors, I spotted Demi right away, sitting on the bench with her friends huddled close. Claire, a friend from her soccer team, Wes, a guy I vaguely knew from band class, and Ethan, who looked almost unrecognizable without his usual easy smile. When Demi saw me, she jumped up, pulling me into a fierce hug. "Oh my God, Casey, I didn't know if you'd make it." She pulled back, her face pale, and her eyes darting over me and the others, checking to make sure they were okay. I squeezed her shoulder. "We're here. You're all right, yeah? What happened?" Demi exhaled, glancing back at her friends. They all looked rattled, their eyes dark and haunted. Ethan, the tallest, nodded at me and the others, offering a small nod. "You guys saved us from losing it, honestly. We didn't think anyone would come." I managed a reassuring smile. "Of course we came. But tell us, what went down back there?" Demi glanced between her friends, then back at the boys, steadying herself. "It started out as just a normal party. We were having fun, dancing, talking, it was fine, but then Jason Lawrence?" Greg asked, raising his eyebrows. Jason was notorious for causing trouble, especially at parties. Demi nodded. "Yeah, so Jason finds this locked door on the upper floor of the house. Some people were telling him to leave it alone, but he wouldn't listen. He thought there might be something hidden inside, and of course his friends just egged him on. Meanwhile, the rest of us were trying to ignore them, just keeping the party going. But after a while, his friends brought him downstairs and laid him on the couch, saying he fainted after entering the room." We all exchanged a worried look. "At first, he didn't look hurt," Demi continued. "Just really out of it, dizzy and nauseous. But then he started puking. Only it wasn't normal puke." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself as if remembering it made her cold. "It was thick, black, like oil. And a few seconds later he started spazzing, thrashing. He attacked his own friends first. He held one of them to the ground and puked this thick, black liquid on his face. Then they started changing too." "Changing?" Kev echoed, his face pale. "Like they weren't human anymore," Demi whispered. "Their eyes turned yellow, and they started moving differently, like they could barely control their bodies. One by one, they turned into whatever those things are." Claire, who had been staring down at her feet, finally spoke up, her voice soft. The rest of us scattered. Some people tried to barricade themselves upstairs. Others jumped from the balcony. We didn't know where else to go, so a few of us managed to make it here. We used to be 6 on our way, but, well, we all stood in silence, knowing that the people we used to go to school with are either dead or infected. Greg ran a hand through his hair, taking it all in. "So, opening that door is what caused all this?" Demi nodded, despair filling her eyes. "They never should have opened it. Whatever was in that room, it wasn't meant to be found." The weight of her words settled over us all, each of us feeling the chill of what we were facing. After a beat, Tommy cleared his throat. "All right then, so we know they can spread this to other people, and we know they attack." Kev squared his shoulders. "So, we need to be smart. We get everyone out, check on our families, and make sure we're not putting ourselves or anyone else in danger. We all nodded, a shared determination in our faces. It was a faint thread of hope, but it was something. Tommy glanced at us. So, first, we go in a loop. Kev's house, Casey's, then Greg's, in between the others. We'll check on everyone we can, then head to my uncle's place out of town. Ethan looked around at the group, his voice low but firm. We stick together, right? Absolutely, I replied. We get everyone out of here. We take the side roads, avoid main streets, and if we have to stop, we stick close and stay quiet. And no matter what, we don't leave anyone behind. With a last nod, we all steeled ourselves, ready to face whatever was out there. Our mission was clear. Together, we would see this through, one step at a time, one person at a time. We made our way down the hall toward the main exit, keeping up a nervous banter, each one trying to distract ourselves from the terror of the night. Greg was half laughing with Kev about the dent on his car from an old road trip, while Tommy and Claire shared a quick joke about our principal. It was strange, like we were still just teens trying to shake off a nightmare, holding on to any bit of normalcy we could. Those things, what even are they? Wes muttered, glancing back, though the hallway behind us was empty. Monsters? Kev suggested with a shrug, though his voice wavered. Nah, that's too generic. They're freakier than that, Ethan replied. They're like demons or something. Maybe we should just call them claws or fiends, Demi threw in, but even she sounded unsure. Tommy, shaking his head, finally spoke up. No, they're lurkers. We all paused for a second, letting it sink in. Lurkers? I repeated, a chill running through me as the name settled. All right, we'll stick with that. We shared a brief, grim smile, and a little of the tension seemed to ease. But the moment of calm didn't last long. Hey, Greg, Wes said suddenly, his voice tight with worry, as he glanced through a window facing the parking lot. Is that your car? Greg walked over, dread creeping up his spine as he peered out the glass. There, in the dim light, his car was under attack. Two lurkers hunched over it, tearing into the metal and smashing windows, ripping the car to shreds. They moved with a sense of purpose, like they knew exactly what they were doing. What the hell? Greg whispered, just as one of the lurkers slowly lifted its head, locking eyes with him. Its eyes were a fierce, glowing yellow, and its mouth twisted in a snarl as it raised a clawed hand, then raked it down the car door, shrieking as it scored deep grooves in the metal. The lurker let out a low, guttural growl, and then turned, sprinting towards us, the second lurker following right behind. Run! I yelled as the first lurker barreled straight for the window, smashing through it with an explosion of glass. Shards scattered across the floor as we turned and ran, sprinting down the hallway, our footsteps echoing as the lurkers thundered after us. We rounded a corner, racing as fast as we could, when a strangled scream cut through the chaos. I spun around, my heart dropping. Ethan had been caught. One of the lurkers had him pinned, its claws wrapped around his torso as he struggled and gasped for breath. Ethan! Demi screamed, starting forward, but I grabbed her arm, pulling her back. The lurker's claws were sinking into Ethan's side, and his face twisted in agony as he fought to breathe. Let him go! Greg shouted, running toward the creature with his bat raised. Tommy and Kev followed, desperation driving them forward as they surrounded the creature, swinging wildly. I gripped my wrench tightly, running forward and swinging at the lurker's legs, trying to knock it off balance. Kev landed a blow on its back, and Tommy jabbed his pocket knife at it, his face pale but determined. The lurker let out a furious hiss, but it barely flinched, its attention locked on Ethan. With a sudden, violent jerk, the lurker's claws sliced into Ethan's chest. His screams were cut short as he went limp, his body slumping forward in the lurker's grip. Blood soaked through his shirt, dripping onto the tile floor, and a cold, numbing horror washed over me. "Ethan!" Claire's voice broke as she took a step back, her face pale. The lurker dropped Ethan's lifeless body, his eyes wide open, staring blankly into the distance. "No!" I felt something snap inside me. I swung my wrench with all my strength, smashing it into the lurker's head. The lurker staggered back, hissing in pain, but its fury only seemed to grow. Its partner, seeing the attack, lunged at Greg, its claws slashing through the air. Greg barely dodged in time, stumbling as he swung his bat, the wood cracking against the creature's side. Wes managed to jab a pen into the lurker's arm, but it only seemed to enrage it further. It swiped at them, forcing them back, each swipe closer than the last. Tommy gritted his teeth, launching forward and stabbing his pocket knife into the lurker's chest. But it didn't slow down. It turned on him, knocking him to the ground with a vicious swipe, claws raking across his arm. The second lurker snarled, leaping towards us with outstretched claws. I swung my wrench, barely managing to deflect its attack as it clawed at me, its face inches from me. For a split second, I saw the hunger in its eyes, felt the heat of its breath as it lunged closer. Then Tommy seized his chance. With a desperate shout, he drove the screwdriver straight into the creature's eye. The lurker let out a shriek, recoiling as black liquid oozed from the wound. I didn't hesitate. I swung my wrench again, striking the creature's head, and it crumpled to the floor with a sickening thud. But the second lurker was already lunging, claws tearing through the air toward Greg. I barely had time to react, swinging my weapon to block its path. Kev jumped in, slamming his tire iron into the creature's side, and together, we forced it back down the hallway. Finally, the lurker reeled, dazed for just a moment. I turned to the others, shouting, "Run! Get out of here!" We bolted, our breaths heavy and panicked as we dashed down the hall and out of a side door, leaving the shattered glass and the dead body of Ethan behind. The night was eerily quiet as we stumbled into the darkness, our hearts pounding and our bodies aching. I forced himself to focus, my mind reeling as I thought of what we had just survived and what we had lost. We didn't have time to grieve, not here, not yet. We had to get somewhere safe, somewhere where we could finally stop running. But as we looked back at the dark silhouette of the school behind us, I knew this wasn't over. We gathered in the school parking lot, trying to steady our breaths and our nerves. Greg's car was a wreck, barely recognizable under the damage the lurkers had done to it. I gripped the wrench in my hands tightly, feeling the weight of frustration and exhaustion pressing down on me. "Now what?" Greg finally snapped, kicking a piece of glass across the asphalt. "My car's a wreck, and we're sitting ducks if that thing comes back." "We could try on foot," Kev said, though he didn't sound convinced. "We're not far from the main roads. If we move fast, maybe we could make it out." "Yeah, and hope we don't run into a whole pack of those things," Tommy replied, a hint of frustration in his voice. As the tension grew, Claire suddenly pointed at something beyond us, her eyes widening. "Guys, what about that?" We all turned to see what she was pointing at. The school bus parked in the far corner of the lot, partially hidden in the shadows of the school building. Greg's face lit up with realization. The school bus, if we can get that thing running. "But how are we supposed to start it?" Kev asked, sounding doubtful. "You think the keys are just lying around?" Wes nodded, scratching the back of his neck. "Actually, yeah. I did a summer internship with Coach Pat last year, helping him with equipment. He mentioned that they keep the bus keys in the faculty office for emergencies. Easy access and all that. They should still be there." Greg sighed, eyes on the school, scanning the shadowed windows. Of course, the keys would be in the same place that lurkers still roaming around. Then we split up, I said. A few of us can head back in and get the keys while the others wait out here with Claire and Demi. No way, Demi interrupted, shaking her head. Casey, you're not going back in there. Not after everything that's happened. She clutched my arm, her eyes pleading. Please don't leave me out here alone. I don't want you going back in there. I softened, putting a hand on her shoulder. Demi, I know you're worried, but we need those keys if we're going to get everyone out of here. You'll be safe out here with Greg and the others. Demi bit her lip, still clearly uneasy. But what if something happens to you in there? I can't just stand out here and wait. Hey, listen, Greg said, stepping beside her. We'll be right here, keeping an eye on everything. We'll look out for you, and if anything goes wrong, we'll call them, and they'll be back here in a flash. Demi's grip on my arm loosened slightly, though the worry didn't leave her eyes. Finally, with a reluctant nod, she stepped back. Fine, but promise you'll be careful, okay? I promise, I said, giving her a reassuring smile. We'll be back before you know it. With a final nod to the others, Wes, Tommy, and me turned back toward the entrance, weapons at the ready. The others stayed back, forming a small circle and keeping a wary eye on the parking lot. I could feel my sister's gaze following us as we slipped into the darkened school, hoping the keys, and our way out, would still be there. This isn't the end. The deeper we go, the darker it gets. And part 3 is where things really start to unravel. If you've made it this far, you won't want to miss what happens next. The link to part 3 will be on the top right corner once it's out, so make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.